It's actually talking time now. So. All right. Thank you very much for coming. I know there were a lot of great talks in this time slot, so I appreciate you coming to listen to me. I'm going to be talking about becoming a polyglot. What I've done is I've created the same engine in different languages. My goal is to make it so that you guys feel comfortable looking at things in different languages so that you can figure out how to consume example code when you see it, or to create something in a different language if that's what's called for at a particular time. So who am I? I am Sanedra on GitHub, on Twitter, on Gmail, on IRC when I'm there, and my website is princesspolymath.com. This money here represents the money that I have set aside to give to someone. I have on my website at princesspolymath.com a survey, and that survey basically is about the languages that people use and the communities that they're involved in. So it's a 5-minute thing. You pick your language, you say what you think about the language, what's good at, you say what you think about the community, what it's good at, and then you say what you think could be better in the community or the language. I really, really, really would love some more Perl input. I currently have Ben Tilley as the person who has given his feedback. Some of you old-timers probably remember who Ben is. I'm certain that you all have different things to say than he does. So I really, really want to make my talk better over time by getting input from people about how their experiences have been in their community, positive things and negative things that have occurred that we should all work together to improve. So, and every entry, and you can put in as many entries as there are programming languages. You may not put 3 in for Perl, but you can put 1 in for Perl and 1 in for Node and 1 in for Ruby, and you get 3 entries into a $100 Amazon gift card, which is coming from my pocket. So this is how important this is to me, to make sure that I get this feedback from the community so that I can really get out there and make some proposals, make some suggestions about how we can become a large together community. Oh, APIs. I have been working with APIs for 10 years, so that means that I am lucky enough to have started working with something that people weren't really that down with, REST web APIs, and now it's the new black. So I have the advantage of being a thought leader in a super sexy area. And I have a book called Irresistible APIs, which talks about how companies can create APIs that developers love to use, which is not something that happens very often at this point. The challenge that I'm trying to address here is that for each of our languages, we have these siloed communities. The siloed communities are echo chambers, and a lot of times in between the communities, in between the Rubyists and the Pythonistas, or between the Perl people and the PHP people, we have contention. PHP is a crappy language, people say. Well, you know what? A lot of the web runs on PHP. It does some pretty cool stuff. It was not as good 10 years ago, but then neither was Perl. We need to think about how to solve problems, and we also need to think about how to be inclusive. So being inclusive means when you're standing around talking to people, you don't say PHP sucks. And why don't you do that? Because this person who's standing over here next to you, maybe they solved a really hard problem in PHP. They're not going to tell you about it. You're not going to learn from that. You're not going to have the collaboration that makes brainstorming with multiple people is much better than brainstorming with one person. The other thing, we talked a lot about the keynotes and the general session in the beginning, talked a lot about beginner Perl programmers. Let's think a little bit about beginner Perl programmers. They might not be beginner programmers. They might be great programmers in other languages. And by treating them poorly, or by questioning the value of their other language, we're going to alienate them. We're going to make it less likely that they want to add Perl to their toolkit, right? So what we need to do is we need to think of it as we are a programming community and there are these various tools and people pick the tools that they want to use. Sometimes they don't pick the most effective tool for the job, but they pick a tool and it works. Great. When I first started using Perl, there was Perl monks, and it terrified me. I never asked a question on Perl monks. Because what happened was someone would ask a question on Perl monks and someone else would say, this is the absolute best way to do it. And someone else would say, no, this is the absolute best way to do it. And then they would fight. And then a new person would come and they would fight. And I'd be like, I just wanted to know how to do the thing. We're much better now as a community. The things that happen on Stack Overflow are much more welcoming. But we really, really need to take the extra step, go the extra mile to make sure that we are making the Perl community an opening and welcoming community for new programmers and also for programmers who have been working on other stuff. You have people who are working on other stuff, they end up looking at legacy Perl code, they need to be able to figure out how to work with that, and we need to be able to help them so that that is something they can get good at. There is also the fear of the unknown. But when there's a lot of people who are great at something and they help you, it's not so scary. So the solution I have here, other than having you all fill out that survey, which we're going to fill out because you really want $100 on Amazon, you could almost buy yourself a Philips Hue light bulb starter kit with that. So there's lots of cool stuff you can buy. What I'm going to demonstrate is I have a simple API project. I've got a Mongo backend. I have a single page app on the front end, which is just JavaScript and HTML. And then I've created API engines in 5 different languages. The goal of this is to make it so that it's easy for you to see how these different code bits compare to each other. What are you looking at? What does it look like? There's a lot of decorators in Perl. There's even more decorators in PHP. Ruby has different things. It's pretty cute. And I don't say that in a mean way. I really like Ruby. I feel warm and fuzzy when I use it. Python looks more like English, but it's a little academic. And Perl is known to be difficult to read, but actually it turns out I used Dancer, and it's really quite a pretty piece. You can find the GitHub code at GitHub Synedra Polyglot. You can take it anytime. You can always get back to me with tweets and ask questions or on the repository itself. You can actually use c9.io, which is something that I have determined is one of the coolest things since sliced bread. It makes you a little Ubuntu thing. You can pull the GitHub repository. It gives you an open website. You can't really do collaboration unless you pay money. But until you get up to the wanting to collaborate with other people, it's fantastic. But most of you, well, some of you have Macs. Most of you. And the stuff will just run on your server. You'll be able to see what each of the different middleware pieces are doing. So for those of you who are familiar with old-time Unix, there used to be the fortune server, and every time you logged into it, it would give you a fortune from some person. So I figured I'd recreate that because I'm sure we all miss it terribly. So I have a fortune cookie server. It goes through all 4 create, read, update, and delete. And let's get to the more juicy part. Well, first, this is the single page app. You get a quote, and there's quotes, and you can delete them and add them, and I'll demonstrate that. So the Mongo setup. In the code, there is a data directory. In the data directory, there is a JSON file. In that JSON file are 2,000 quotes. You just import them into Mongo, and now you've got your MongoDB backend. By the way, if anybody has any questions about anything I say, feel free to raise your hand. I'm not so much a lecturer as a conversation starter, so I'm happy to take any questions, and you won't throw me off. Before we get to the deeper code, I'm going to talk a little bit about schema modeling. I have modeled the schema for this API, and it represents exactly what the API does. So a schema model is like an old WSDL file, It tells you what each endpoint does, what your response is going to look like, what your request should look like if you're sending data. It is a map of your API. Once upon a time, when we got rid of WSDL files and we started using REST, people were like, oh, this is so great. We don't have to do the mapping anymore. We don't have to keep track of it. And all developers are going to make super consistent, beautiful APIs that are a joy to behold. Yeah, no, that's not what happened. So now we have some different ways of modeling the API. And one of the advantages of this is when you have this API schema model, you can then have conversations about the API before you start coding. As coders, that probably doesn't sound as fun as just starting to code. However, it is a lot more fun than starting to code, having someone say it's wrong, and redoing the code, which is what happens when not everybody knows exactly what's going to happen with the API. So I'm going to talk about two different schema modeling languages. There's more. Blueprint is also a schema modeling language, and you can see examples of that. With these, you get some stuff for free. Okay, so RAML, an open API, and Blueprint all provide you with free endpoint reference documentation that is dynamic. So you can see what's going to happen when somebody gets this thing. It just shows you what the response is going to look like. All the stuff that you don't want to document because it's so obvious is done. You don't have to do anything else with it. You can focus on tutorials and use cases and workflows, things that are going to actually help people be successful using your API. So here's RAML. Ooh, fancy keynote. So you get a little bit of meta information at the top. It tells you what the base URI is and what version of RAML you're using. You have an endpoint. The endpoint is quotes, and it has a little bit of meta information, shows you about the query parameters that you can send for that particular endpoint. Then it tells you what you're going to get back. This is what it's going to look like. It's going to be JSON, and it's going to have content that looks like this. As a developer, if you have a schema model, you can actually create a mock server around that schema model and create a fake client before there's actually any API to work with. So Swagger has more metadata. It has some things that are kind of an advantage. You can see it's producing application JSON. We were saying application JSON in RAML. We were saying it at the individual object level, and now we've got it up higher. It's slightly different in how it represents things, but it's pretty clear. Let me just tell you, I have no dog in this race. Whatever schema modeling system works for you is the right one to use. Whatever feels right. So we got paths, we got quotes, and what we're doing here is we're getting that information, and then for a response, I'm going to get an array back, and there's a definition down at the bottom that says what a quote looks like. So further down in the information. So let me show you a little bit about, see if I can find it. That's my website. And there's my book. What a shock. Okay. My book is going to be in paper form at the end of August. It is currently in MEP form, so you can buy it if you want. So you can see over here, this is basically what I was showing you before. It's tiny and hard to read. But you can see over there, this is our freebie documentation. It's pretty sexy looking, right? You can get the specific things, you can get the quotes, you can see what you're going to get back, you can see what an error is going to look like. So this is Swagger, which is currently called Open API. Used to be called Swagger, was called Swagger for a long time. They were one of the first ones out there. A lot of people still say Swagger, but if someone says Open API, what they mean is the thing that used to be Swagger. So don't get confused when you see Swagger things that are the same as Open API things. This is the most actively developed schema modeling framework doesn't necessarily mean it's best. Akamai is actually moving to using RAML, and the reason we're doing that is because it is the best system for our development process. So what we want to do is we want to define the schema at the same time as the functional specification for the API and have it follow all the way through. And Swagger supports more the idea of sort of creating code stubs out of it and kind of coding up instead of starting at the top and coding backwards. Again, whatever works for you. Oh man, I tried to prep this for you so you didn't have to log in. All right, so this is the RAML version of the same thing. You can see there's post here. It shows you, let's see if I can make it any bigger. It shows you what it is that you would post and then what you would get back. It shows you if you got a 500, what would it look like? Makes it easier to identify what it is that you need. This shows you retrieving a random quote. Sun Yi is my favorite example, so there he is. So the point here is one of the things that I created because I was creating a bunch of different resources that did the same thing was I needed to have a definition of what that thing was so that I could test against it and make sure that I was actually creating what I said I was creating. Note that my APIs are not perfect. My little bits of engines are not ideal yet. If they can have bugs and will have bugs, I didn't get them all perfect. And if you find something that's wrong with them, please open an issue or a pull request. I like pull requests better than issues. I mean, who doesn't? Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to go through each of these and I'm going to talk about kind of what the language has as features and then show you what it looks like with the choices that I made. So Perl, you're all familiar with, right? Has CPAN. The community got a little stagnant for a while. And we're trying to reach out to new people who haven't used Perl before. People who use Perl sometimes are still using Perl 4 because I wrote that code and that shit just works. I have no reason to rewrite that code. So Perl has this reputation for being a very old, moldy kind of language. We're doing better. Perl 6 will help. The activity around Perl 5 has been really helpful, and CPAN has always been the best resource for getting libraries for whatever for any language. I've always loved Perl, so I put Perl first though because I'm here. So I'm using Dancer. I'm not using Catalyst. I'm not using Catalyst because Catalyst would be a sledgehammer for a nail. Dancer is a really, really great framework for basic web applications. API is exactly the kind of thing that it is fantastic for. And it's pretty. I wrote the code for Perl using Dancer, and I was like, hey, that's kind of nice to look at. So I got Dancer, MongoDB. This is how I'm setting up the Mongo. Very straightforward. I will tell you a secret. When I was setting up these APIs, it never occurred to me that the hardest thing to do was going to be serve static content. And yet, there you have it. In almost every language, it took me less time to write the API than it did to figure out how to get that index file to show up. But show up it does. So that's what I'm showing here. So if you go through the same process and you want to make a little API that has a silly little thing in the front end, I got your back. So the routes, I'm not zooming in on these, but you can see this is very clear. If you can see. If you can't, then you can look at the GitHub, and that's very clear. But it gets the thing, it pulls the stuff from Mongo, and what this is show me the first 10 items. That's what they all do, is show the first 10 items. and it returns the results. So this is simple, right? This is not hard Perl code, and you could get it to do whatever you want. Now I'm going to talk a little bit about the Mongo that something that I haven't mentioned, which is I wanted to make a simple looking API. A simple looking API is not /API /quote/ really ugly Mongo ID. No, that people look at that, they'll be like, oh, that's scary. So I wanted to make my own ID because that's the OID, right? So I should be able to have my own ID. That works great, except in Ruby. Can't have that. Ruby overrides ID with OID. So I have index. I only have index because I want to have a pretty thing. So, sometimes you have to make a not ideal answer for something that you want. And to me, it was most important that this was usable by people. All right, so PHP. Actually, let's see if my system is working. Oh, no, we'll go there later. You guys are all awake. I can tell. All right, that's the one thing I didn't test today, so that'll be exciting. So I'll probably pull the Docker container. That's the easiest way. The PHP Mongo setup looks basically identical to the Perl Mongo setup, right? I mean, we're doing the setup, using the same stuff. And frankly, the PHP route looks pretty much exactly like the Perl stuff. So this is one of the cases where you can look at them side by side and say, hey, what's the difference? How is it similar? How is it different? This get, very similar. When we get to Node and Ruby, you're going to find that the dialect of those is slightly different in how it expresses this. But you get the information. And the static stuff. Once again, this was hard, so it's here for you. Python Mongo setup. Python's a little bit weirder. PyMongo does some magic around things. So you're putting less information in there because it's going to do some of the magic within the actual call. The static information. Actually, do we have another one? Yes, okay. Sorry. Okay, so this is the static information. Clearly, shouldn't be hard, but nobody ever says like static pages in a framework. And this is the other part of the static. It tells it where to get that information. So see, there's some stuff that's assumed down here. It's grabbing it from the top. And then you add the resources at the bottom. So we have a quote list here. We have a get and a post. So this is different. We're not saying get this endpoint. We're saying I have an object, and I'm going to do the get action on it or the post option on it. And the quote list is defined down here as API quotes. Okay, Ruby. Aw, it's so cute. So yeah, other than the fact that you can't have ID, I had to go back and rewrite all of them because Ruby was like number 4. So this is the static information. Here's the route. So, it's this do, that do, but it's actually quite simple. Like this says go grab 10 things and spew them out on the page. Everyone else took, 10, 15 lines to say that. Ruby doesn't. Ruby is a great language if you're doing what Ruby wants you to do. And this is what Ruby Sinatra wants you to do. I'm using Dancer, Flask, Sinatra, and Slim. And then for Node, I have both Express and Happy because I think they're both cool. So Node, the Mongo setup's the same for both of them. Here's the static. And there's the route. So we're doing router.route.get. We're doing chaining. In Happy, In Happy, we have server.route, and then it's get, path, handler. It's a slightly different way to present it. Now, I would say that this is all about what feels right to you. If you've written a lot of JavaScript code, you're probably going to like Express better. Chaining feels right to most people who are JavaScript people. If you're coming from another language, this may feel more accurate to you. It feels like it has all of the information that you're looking for in this one place. All right, so I'm now bravely going to go and start this Docker thing. Actually, which I should have done earlier. Does anybody have any questions before I attempt to get Docker to behave for me? No questions? This all makes total sense.
Do you have any generalizations that you want to make based on the refactoring you had to do for changing OID and data depth?
I would say, I mean, it was an artificial requirement that I had. I just didn't want it to be ugly, and so I had to just work through it. No, I'm waiting for an IP. Maybe I don't have internet. That would be awesome. Oh yeah, I'm on AT&T Wi-Fi. Let's try this. So there's not really a way around it. Like if you make an assumption that's based on what most of them do, and then you want to do the last one, you'll find out that, well, maybe I can't do that. All right, we're gonna try it the other way. Okay. So the first thing, there's a README in here, and I'm going to show you the GitHub repository so you can see that the README is actually quite useful. Oh, do you guys want to see Cloud9? Have you seen it before? Because I can do it on Cloud9. It's pretty easy. And I have time. Assuming, of course, that my internet works. Yay! So Cloud9 it's got editing capabilities. It allows you to that's what I thought. Dang. Right, so forgot password. I'm going to talk through this. I can just do it on my system. You guys all should be pulling down the GitHub repository on your systems to play with it. So if I go into Perl, I have to start MongoD. All right, I had this much better before. All right, so what we want is we want to start Mongo, which is MongoD. Yes. And then I'm going to go into the Dropbox. You can run away. It's okay. It's cool when it works, I tell you. And I'll get there in about 2 minutes. Okay, so in the README file, it tells you how to do what you need to do. So one of the things you need to do is you need to do a Mongo import. Okay, so I imported 2001 documents. So now I can go Perl dancer server.perl. I love the Perl dancer dances and Sinatra sings. It's so cool. Like they all take the stage, they do their thing, and all is good with the world. And I believe that I chose 8080. Okay, so this is part of the static, which is hello from here I am. So that's just the static stuff to show you that, in fact, you are getting the Perl version. Okay, so now we have, oh, Ruby rocks, look at that. We don't want that. So now we have the actual front page application. So one of the things that's really important to realize is if you delete something here and then you run one of the other servers, it's going to show you exactly the same page. It's looking at the same Mongo database backend. You can do all of the things that you want to do. You can view them. You can delete them. You can add a new quote. Perl is awesome by me. It's being cranky. Oh. All right. So it'll work in one of the other ones, I'm sure. So what you can do to see what the API calls are is that you can use Chrome and Chrome developer tools. Go to localhost 8080 demo. Let's look at the developer tools. I'm sure you guys are perfectly familiar with this. And I'll go ahead and reload this. And we'll look at something. So I asked for a random, and I got back this JSON, right? So this is the information that I'm getting from each of the endpoints. I asked for quotes. Quotes by default gives you 10 quotes, and so this is the information I got back. So that's what's generating this information over here. If I click on delete, I didn't get a response back because it's a delete. The response I got back should be a 204, but it didn't say. All right. And then again, we asked for a random, so we got the random, which is sort of being weird, and then we got the quotes again. So this is very, very simple, right? This is the most simple API interaction that you can possibly have. So let's go look at the Ruby Sinatra server. And Sinatra will get out on the stage and do his thing. And so it's localhost 8080 again. And so if I load this, it should look just the same, which it does. But let's make sure that we're getting Ruby. Let's make that bigger. Okay, it says hello world from Sinatra. It's hard to see. If I get rid of this, you'll be able to see it better. And then if I go to demo, it works. And let's see if we can say Ruby rocks orders again. Okay, so that one actually worked. I need to fix the Perl one, apparently. So as you can see, the main goal here is to make it exactly the same in every case. The MongoDB, it's set up to just have those quotes, but whatever it is that you're going to do, if you're going to create a basic API and what you want is CRUD, all of those are here in all of the different languages. Do you guys want to see any particular language? I mean, they're all going to do exactly the same thing. All right, and you've all filled out the survey, right? Before I go on anymore.
Where is it on the site? I can find it.
If you go to princesspolymath.com and click on the money.
Follow the money.
Follow the money. The money is there for you. And for those of you who are new, I have a survey. It's linked from my website, princesspolymath.com. I'm giving away a $100 gift certificate, Amazon, to someone who fills it out. You can fill it out for as many languages as you want to. I encourage you to do so. And please help me make my information about each of the silos different. So I'm going to talk a little bit more about those different communities as I'm here. Python has a reputation as an academic sort of language. And a lot of people who ask questions in Python get very intimidated by the quality and tone of the answers that they get. It is one of the cases where I think Perl really does a much better job. We've had Rendell Schwartz and Tom Christensen answering questions in full sentences and with expecting to help people. So Python, what we can learn from Python is it's a little easier to get started with Python. Pip is a little easier than CPAN. Perl is very, very powerful. It has a ton of different libraries, but when you're just getting started and you just want to do something simple like this, how do you get started? How do you know Catalyst versus Dancer? We don't have, one of the things that made me saddest about Perl, I was actually, I was offered a job a long time ago to work for Tengen as the Perl driver evangelist person. And one of the things that made me super sad about Perl was when I went to hackathons, there were Ruby people, there were Python people, there were PHP people, there were Node people. No Perl people. There was no easy to make development stack like Mean. There was no, here's all that you need, stick your application magic in there, and Bob's your uncle, you win a prize. All right, and that, it reduces the creativity in our environment, and it reduces our ability to mingle with people of the other languages as they're at hackathons, because we figure that's not our thing. It is our thing. Solving hard problems, doing cool things, we want to do that. Everybody wants to do that. But that's one of the things I learned with hackathons, with evangelism, was we, as a Perl community, could really step up our game in terms of making things like Dancer. Dancer and Mongo is a great stack. However, when I set up Dancer and Mongo the first time, a couple years ago, it took me all weekend. I have 15 years of Perl experience, and it took me all weekend. I had to go to 17 different tutorials, and each of them had a kernel of truth in them. One. And it wasn't clear where that kernel of truth was. Like, I had to go through all of them and figure out, oh, this piece is right. Oh, and that piece is. As things get versioned, we don't pay attention. We don't say, I've just solved a problem that's pretty common or that I'd like people to be able to solve, so I'm going to put stuff out there. That is much more the behavior of Node people. Node people are newer, and so they're all new. They haven't been doing anything for 20 years. And so they remember, oh, right, I tried to do this thing, and it didn't work the way I wanted it to. And so they're more helpful. Right? So what can we learn from the other languages? Rubyists are a little segregationist because people tend to look down on Ruby. Real programmers of the other languages say, oh, Ruby's just, it's just easy, it's cute, it's fun. And unfortunately for Ruby, it's sort of become too bloated to compare well with Node when you're looking at Ruby on Rails. So not just great, it's a fine answer. So I would actually like to open the questions up to find out what kind of ideas do you guys have about, or what experience have you had in terms of community interactions, what's good, what could be improved. You're going to put this in the survey, but we can have a conversation. Yes?
So this is the first Perl conference I've ever been to, and I'm not here to talk about Perl, which is why I'm here, I guess. And I don't, I'm typically, I've been primarily a PHP developer for the last 15, 20 years. And my first experience when I was talking with folks about, hey, you should submit to the app, see what this talk to anybody do. In this room, right after this, so you can see the rest. So I watched this highlights video that's on the front page of the ABSI website.
Mm-hmm.
And it's all, folks doing stuff and things like that. And then in the middle of it, there's a cut of a guy slamming PHP. And then that's it. And there's, it goes on for doing other stuff. I felt super unwelcome.
Yeah, that's.
And I know why people do it. I've been in this thing long enough where I know, and I've talked some shit about stuff too. But I've gotten to the point where I'm so sick and tired of that casual elitism that we either actively participate in or passively endorse by not saying anything. And I gotta tell you that I know PHP people who do this too, and there's wild differences within PHP because there's generalists, and then there's huge communities that are probably much larger than the generalist PHP community that are focused specifically on applications built in PHP. The WordPress community is much more active and larger than
Oh, yeah.
PHP generalist
And
community,
Drupal.
for example, and Drupal and Joomla and all. So that's what I know. So that's what I can speak.
Yeah,
I guess I just want to say, it really turns people off because it makes a community seem elitist and unwelcoming.
right.
And I got to tell you, it really is a bad idea. And so I am so glad that you're saying the things that you are, because I think it's really important. I can't tolerate that on any level, and I think that's something we really have to work on in all of these communities. I get sick when people slam on it, like people say stuff about Perl, like,
Yeah.
obviously lots of people use it.
Well, it's one of the main things out there for DevOps. DevOps is the new the new fancy, right? But one of the things that I find so that I find some dichotomies around. For instance, Python is easier to read than Perl. Perl was written by a linguist, and Python was written by a mathematician. So what's up with that? But the Perl community is all about Tim Toady, right? There's more than one way to do it. And that's not just in Perl, right? Sometimes the fastest way for someone to get something done is to solve the problem in Ruby. And that's fine. But this is exactly what I'm talking about. We need to lead the communities. We need to show the other language communities, hey, the Perl community, we're coming back. We've got Perl 6. We're becoming more welcoming to beginners. And not just beginners, again, in programming. Beginners to the language. We need to help them understand the dialect as opposed to teaching them how to program. So, anyone else? Have a...
Well, I'm kind of a polyglot programmer already, and part of my day job is in Perl. And I think I've kind of seen some of that bashing, but I like to use different tools for different things.
Mm-hmm.
Perl is really great in a lot of things, but if you need HTTPS in the core language, Perl
Not so great.
Is a choice for you. And so sometimes, but Perl is everywhere. Every Debian and Ubuntu system has Perl, and that's really powerful. You have all of the power of the Unix and C stuff on virtually, you can install it on virtually any system on the planet, even VMS, and you have that language everywhere. That's awesome. And so it has portability that no other language other than maybe C has. And so it's, but I like to use the right tool for the job depending on what I'm doing, and sometimes that's an unpopular decision.
Well, and there's not only the right tool for the job, sometimes they're the right tool for the programmer. Some things are more efficiently done in Perl, and the person is more comfortable in Python. Rock on with their bad selves. If they solve the problem, then they've solved the problem. A conversation with them shouldn't be, that was dumb, you shouldn't have done that in Python. It should be, hey, that's really cool. Did you want to see how it would have looked in Perl? I mean, right, what's the difference between those two things? I have a thing that I really like, and I see you have Legos, but actually I have Lincoln Logs. And I see you built a house. Let me show you the house I can build. Isn't that neat? So yeah, thinking about it that way, there's always a right tool for the job, but I want us to realize that sometimes the the least efficient tool for the job is perfectly fine. We're programmers. We program well. Language is just a shim layer between our brain and the computer.
If it's good enough for the job, then if you get the job done with Python, even if it's not the prettiest way to do it, that gets it. You got the job done, and that's what matters.
Exactly. All right, I have 5 more minutes. Any other questions or thoughts? Again, you can take this time to download my polyglot repository and play with it. It's really fun, and you'll learn a lot about how the different languages compare to each other in terms of the dialects. We're not talking really about languages, especially because I have the interpreted spectrum here. I'm not talking about any compiled languages. We are really talking about dialects and not specifically languages. You can figure out what's going on. The algorithm's not hard. The logic isn't hard. So if that's all yes?
So, recently I was at Python.
Last week or 2 weeks ago.
And the last 2 to 3 years actually, the one thing, and being a Perl programmer, the one thing I noticed is that their focus is on community.
Mm-hmm.
That the conference does not focus primarily on language. They
Right.
focus primarily on community, bringing new people in, bringing things in, which means that most of the Python programmers that you meet are new programmers.
Right.
Not necessarily, mostly new to programming.
Right.
In general.
Because the Pythonista stuff, the Ruby girls, all these things.
Yeah. So one of the things that I saw was that not only are they very welcoming, but all of these new programmers, they don't have that, oh, I know your language is terrible, being built into them. They've heard, oh, I heard Perl was terrible.
Right.
I heard Perl you can't read, but they don't have the experience with it. They don't have that kind of negative connotations
Right.
for any of them. So
It is nice.
it is that so once the community is there, not being negative.
Right. So the other thing I wanted to point out, and this is also for the organizers of this conference, which is that Perl conferences, in my experience, and I've been away from them for 10 years, but it looks the same now, we talk a lot about the language. We do not talk a lot about what I did with the language or how I use the language in a way that then you can do a shim layer. I do a talk where it's written in Node, and I take my Fitbit and there's a Twilio thing, and then there's my Philips Hue light bulbs, and it's super fun, and people can extend it to do all sorts of other things. And partly because we don't have this hackathon culture where we're building things because we think they're cool. We don't have those talks at conferences where we're showing off the fun things that we did and sparking innovation. So I would like us as a community to really move towards that. Move towards having some, fun and silly talks that aren't, down in the CPAN libraries. But what did I do with it? How did I make something awesome out of it? So just keep that in mind as well. Anyways, thank you very much for coming. I am unfortunately a helicopter speaker this time. I have to go do work tomorrow. So if you want to grab me after this, it's fine. You can get me on Twitter. You can get me, my email is my Twitter at gmail.com or my Twitter at mac.com. There's just all sorts of ways to find me. princesspolymath.com. And I'd love to hear, what you have to say, especially in that survey. So thanks very much.